She was born in the Dominican Republic and immigrated to the United States when she was 7 years old. She graduated from American University, where she majored in justice and law. Due to her upbringing and cultural context, she identifies as an advocate for social justice. Because of her deep love of learning, she has chosen education as her platform for social justice work. As an educator, Ivanna co-founded Love Your Magic, a grassroots organization committed to the healthy development of Black and brown girls. Love Your Magic curates spaces, designs programs, and engages in initiatives with the sole aim of empowering Black and brown girls. We're so excited to have Ivanna join us today.
I'm excited to be here.
Next we have Erica Frasier. Erica is a writer and content creator in the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia. She creates content for people that are learning how to love themselves and need more encouragement along the way. Erica has written 2 ebooks, Lucid and Letting Go, and Your Guide to Releasing the Past and Embracing Your Future. When she isn't roaming the streets of DC, she can be found at home sipping tea and watching TV with her cat. To read more about Erica's work, we're going to make sure that you guys have her Instagram and her website so you can follow her as well. Thanks for joining us, Erica.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me.
Next we have Jennifer. Jenn Roberts is an equity strategist, facilitator, and social designer working at the intersection of systems, change, equity, innovation, and design. She is the CEO of Burst Education Group, a consultancy that helps organizations turn their good interventions into equitable, anti-racist action through innovative learning experiences and dynamic coaching. The joy of her work is being able to impact the issues she cares about most, which are education, maternal health, technology, and the arts, drawing on her past experiences as an elementary school teacher and her background in systems design and adult learning. Most recently, she has helped organize the Make the Breast Pump Not Suck hackathon at MIT and the Detroit Birth and Breastfeeding Hackathon in Detroit. She is currently organizing her 3rd hackathon, Feminist Futures, experimenting with a full virtual approach. She was selected as a 2021 USC Annenberg Innovation Lab Civics long fellowship founded at the MacArthur Foundation, geared towards empowering artists, creators, storytellers, organizers, and others working at the intersection of technology and culture to further hone their practice. Through the fellowship, she is currently designing an intergenerational innovation lab specifically for Black women, set to launch in summer 2021. Thanks so much for joining us, Jenn.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have Danielle Lyles Barton. After surviving multiple sexual assaults, seemingly unbearable heartbreak, and an unhealthy and unhappy vagina, and emotional dysfunction, Danielle Lyles Barton made a personal and radical decision to begin the journey of healing herself and has been unwavering ever since. She became aware of how much authority in her life. She dedicated the last decade to learning how to reclaim her womb, her gut, her sensuality, and her love of self after sexual trauma. Birthed her life's mission out of trauma, heartbreak, and grief she experienced, and accessed deep joy and liberation through the gift of non-attachment. Now she dedicates her life to sharing all that she's learned and overcome with other women just like her. Currently, she does this through her 6-week intensive, When She Blooms, designed for self-mastery, I always butcher this word, I don't know why, guys. In our collective blooming. Together, we journey back into our womb space as a reclaiming of our power, sensuality, and deep joy. I am so excited to have you guys join us. Danielle, Ivanna, Jenn, Erica, we're so excited to learn more about your work and how you live in your full magic. You guys look like you just exude magic, and I've talked with some of you guys prior to this, and I'm super excited to get into this deep conversation with you guys. So let's start at the top. The title of this workshop is Living in Your Full Magic. What does that mean to you? Let's kick it off with Jenn. What does living in your full magic mean to you?
So I just want to say thanks again for inviting me. Really excited to be here. For me, I think living in your magic means being authentically yourself. And that's an easy thing to say, but a much harder thing to do. And I think even as an adult, I am still learning how to be my authentic self in every place, not just in the places I'm most comfortable. And so for me, it's like digging in and figuring out, what do you love? What do you like? Who are you? How do you want to show up? And figuring out how you can do more of that every day. And I think when you do that, you glow from the inside out and people see it. So I think authenticity is the biggest thing for me.
Jenn, I have to agree. I think when I hear those words, living in your full magic, it really is just about living your truth and taking the time to practice that. It is a practice, right? It is not just something that you say, okay, great, from this moment on, I'm going to live in my truth, I'm going to live in my magic, and I'm just gonna do it, right? Like there will be opportunities that will present themselves just as a result of you saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I want to live. And so it is a daily commitment, a daily practice, I think for me too, knowing that there are some spaces that are safer to do that than others. I'm quite intentional about seeking out the spaces that are very safe for me to be in the practice of living in my full magic, be in the practice of, living fully out loud with who I am, and really seeking out, those communities, those friends, those places, and getting really clear on what are the elements that I need to feel safe. Right. So there's definitely a lot of introspection that I think is required on the front end to even be able to get to the place where you can start practicing it.
I can share next. When I think about living in my magic, I think a lot about much of what has already been said by both Jenn and Danielle, but also this idea of loving the parts of yourself that are still evolving. And I think as like Black and brown women, a lot of times we are really tough on ourselves. And I know that for me, it has very much been a practice where I'm just really getting comfortable with who I am and how I show up in the world, and extending myself the same grace that I extend to others, and loving those parts that I know, maybe I'm not fully where I want to be in terms of like XYZ, but I'm still going to love that part of myself. And I think to me, that's really what it means to live in your full magic.
Yeah, similar to what Ivanna said, I was going to say for me, it's like giving myself permission to thrive as a flawed person. I was always waiting for this point until things were perfect or until I was perfect, and not realizing that I was limiting myself, but also making it just really hard for me to even practice standing in my truth and loving myself because I was waiting for something that didn't exist. And so just knowing that I'm allowed to take up space and I'm able to, just fully live life and thrive, even if things are not 100% perfect, is how I show up and live in my full magic.
Thank you guys so much for sharing that. I think it's so important, multiple aspects that you guys described of tapping into tribe and community. And I loved what you added at the end, Erica, that you don't have to be in this perfect place to live in your full magic, that there's also places of healing, there's places of rest, there's places of resilience that we can also live in our full magic. So thank you guys so much for sharing. Next, we're gonna hop to some of the specific questions that we prepared based on you guys' work, just the amazing magic that you are shining and that you're bringing to the world. So I'm gonna start with Danielle. With your bio, that you focus on healing, and you talked a little bit about what living in your full magic means to you. But can you talk a little bit further about how you see healing as a process or a part of living in your full magic, or just a part or a process of being mentally well and healthy?
Yes. Thank you, Lauren. So when I think healing nowadays, right, gets this kind of reputation that it has to look one particular way or a very specific way, and it's like super spiritual and holy and like really pristine of a process, but that has not been my experience. I see some head nods from the panel, so I'm gonna take it that means that has not been your experience. It's really messy, it's really nuanced, and it looks very different every single day. And for me, I think one of the things that has become really important in my mental well-being and my healing journey is just moment by moment, day by day, as often as I can remember, to stop and just ask myself, what do I need in this moment to be well? That's it. Maybe that's, a bath, maybe it's a nap, maybe it's ordering some food on DoorDash because I don't really feel like, preparing a meal. It looks different, right? But really allowing myself space to just show up and soothe and care for myself in that way, and really taking the time to arm myself with tools, so to speak. So, taking the time for me and in my process, what it has looked like was, taking the time to learn yoga so that I could reintegrate into my body, which, having survived sexual trauma, that was huge, right? And just essential. But, learning about breath work, learning, about, meditation, just, there are so many, there are like infinite tools. And sometimes it really is as simple as like, okay, let me go take a bath. Like, that's a tool that I literally have in my arsenal, right? And knowing, okay, well, for this bath, I'm gonna put, some essential oil. For this bath, I'm gonna do some Epsom salt. I'm gonna get some, flowers when my roses, die off, and I'm gonna put those in the bath. Just it can be so vast, but having the tools, knowing how to use them, knowing when to use them, is really important. And so one of the questions too that you had asked Lauren when we were preparing for the panel was like, what does healing look like? And like I said, it's incredibly messy, and I would say, like it looks like us on the panel. It looks like just everyday people, walking the street, trying to figure themselves out, figure out life, like getting up after hard things have happened. And sometimes we don't get up. Sometimes we just on the flow, and we need to call a friend right there, on the floor, like, hey, sis, can you just come sit with me right here on this floor, because I'm not ready to get up. I just need to cry through it. And so, yeah, it's really, I think, if I had to kind of summarize it really succinctly, it is choosing me and being deeply committed to doing whatever it is that I need to do that. Being committed to myself, choosing me first, choosing to live by any means necessary. Like, that's, I think, in a nutshell, really simply put, what healing means for me.
I think it's so important that you said by any means necessary, because sometimes others will not always support the ways in which we're healing. Even some of the people closest to us, they don't always want us to heal from the past. That can be very scary, or others are not necessarily ready for those processes or ready to see what the changes look like in us. So I think that it is really important to focus on, why it's important to focus And then last thing I think really speaks to your work with healing. I was reading, I think it was Alex L's book, and she talks about how healing is not a destination, that it's a journey. And I really get that from your work as well, that, you know, it's a process, but it's something that, you know, there's phases to it, that, you know, you get to a place where you think you've healed from something and something can pop back up. But now you have different tools that you're able to access. You have a different mindset and headspace to really help you with that next phase of healing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my next question was for Jenn. I was mentioning that I know that anti-racism work and equity work is kind of hot right now, but something that you have been doing for quite some time and have really centered your work and your passion around this work. So can you talk to us a little bit about where Black girls fit into this? Because I feel like these conversations sometimes, it doesn't necessarily feel like it includes us. Where do you see Black girls fitting into your work and work overall that's centered around anti-racism and equity initiatives?
Thanks, Lauren. I often tell people I started doing this work before it was cute, you know, like when nobody wanted to do it and nobody was talking about it. But I think when I think about Black girls in particular and how we fit into this space, I think there's a couple things I say we have to think about. And one of them is the capacity we have to talk about this in the first place. And we have the ability to opt out if we need to, you know, from these conversations for exactly what Danielle was saying, for our healing purposes and to, you know, keep our spirits intact. But when we choose to engage, when we're not resting from the process of social justice, to me, Black girls fit in by using their radical imagination. And I really believe what, you know, the women from the Combahee River Collective talked about, that none of us are going to be free until Black women are free. And so for me, it's about hearing from Black women, hearing from Black girls, what does it look like to be free to you? And then me trying to create space for them to be able to be that way. And then within their organizations, when I'm working with different organizations, making sure that those organizations are set up in a way where those Black women can show up and be in their full magic and their authentic selves. And so I think what it looks like for Black girls to be involved in anti-racism work or social justice work is different for everyone because of where we have our capacity to contribute, and then also where our talents are. But where I really feel like our work is in like tapping into that imagination in our community and our tribe together as Black women, because I think we have remarkable things to contribute to liberation and the idea of where we could be and what our futures could look like. And when we design futures, we design for everyone. Like, that's just how Black women are built. So, you know, when I think about this work, it's really about us thinking and learning how to recognize the way the systems in our country show up and impact us. And so often I tell folks, like, the best thing you can do is learn everything about how the system operates, not the, you know, like, I want the recipe. I don't want the, you know, the menu. I want to know how it works so that I can tweak the system, pull the strings in the ways that make sense to me, tear down the stuff that we shouldn't have anymore, right? But I have to know it intimately to do that. And so, like, learning, figuring out the ways you want to disrupt the system, and then figuring out what it looks like to rebuild something new and transformational with community. And so I think that's something we can all do and figure out how to do in a way that feels safe for us and with people who feel safe to us, because I think we see tons of trauma every day on the news. And so finding ways to do this work in community with people who love and care about us is the way I see Black girls fitting into this.
I love that you said we want the recipe, because I have a lot of friends that honestly I think it's most Black women and girls at this point get tapped at, you know, in this point, this inflection point that we are in, specifically here in America, to do work around diversity or inclusion, anti-racism, and too often the entities that are tapping them, whether it's in academic settings or in the corporate setting, they just want to say, hey, we want, like you said, we want you to make this cake. You know, we're not going to give you what all the components that go into these systems that, like you said, have oppressed or have excluded individuals, including Black women and girls. They want us to just show up and make it happen without providing all, you know, what are the things that go into these systems.
And they want us to fix the system we didn't mess up in the first place, which really is not our responsibility. And so, like, you know, I think helping Black folks, Black women in particular, one, understand that, but then like understanding that we have such a commitment to our communities that we know we're not gonna be able to just sit down and not do anything. So it's really about combining that mental health piece with it and like really learning for yourself, like, what is my place to show up in this? And when do I need to rest from this? And who do I recharge with so I can stay in the game? Like, that is really our job within this. Like, it is not our job to fix this thing. But, you know, like, we are gonna have to care for our communities as we work to see a future where we all can thrive in. And so in that process, I think, you know, we have to figure out where we best want to show up. And I think I remember Bernice King talking about, like, every piece of the work is important. If you're an artist, do your art. If you a dance your dance. Like, if you can talk to people, talk to people. Like, every single piece of what we have to offer is important in the fight for liberation. So yeah, that's what I would say. Let's figure out where you fit in and then do it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jenn. So I'm going to move on to Ivanna. So your work really focuses and centers on self-advocacy, self-love, and sisterhood. I know that these are concepts that these terms that we hear quite often, but do you mind talking to us about what is your personal definition of these terms and how are they interrelated?
Absolutely. So the work that I do with Love Your Magic, as you mentioned, focuses on self-love, self-advocacy, and sisterhood. As a Black girl and former classroom teacher, I experienced firsthand the ways in which these values weren't really instilled in our girls in school, and oftentimes were values that were made so that our girls like internalize the opposite of this. So when it comes to self-love, I think for us, it's really important for young girls to love all of who they are, from like their hair to the way that they show up in the world, because we believe that through self-love, our girls will really get the confidence and be able to show up in the world authentically, which in turn will then help them achieve in school. Self-advocacy, this idea of like giving young girls the tools to advocate for themselves. Too often our girls internalize values that tell them to be silent, especially in school. And so for us, it's really important to teach young girls like, hey, when these things happen, like, this is a way that you can advocate for yourself, even if it means, you know, shaking the table, not necessarily like physically shaking the table, but even if it doesn't necessarily sit well with administration or your educators, it's always important to lean into the fullness of who you are and advocate for yourself when you see that something is wrong. And then sisterhood, our girls are often socialized to view other girls as competition, especially as Black women and girls. And so for us, it's really important to teach our girl that another girl's success doesn't dim their light. It actually helps them shine brighter. And so I think for us, these are three values that oftentimes when they're missing, it really puts our girls on the path to school to prison pipeline, and has resulted in our girls being adultified and criminalized in school. And so we really believe that when young girls have the ability to love themselves, advocate for themselves, and practice sisterhood, they're able to show up in school settings and in their communities in a way that really disrupts this idea that, you know, Black girls are, you know, are not children. They're showing up in the world as adults, and in turn really reduces the amount of, or like the adultification and criminalization that our girls experience in school.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I asked that question because I think it's really important for us to have our personal definitions for things. Like too often we just go off of, Webster or, Urban Dictionary at times. But I've learned as I've gotten older how important it is to have your personal definition, because then you can relate to the term or the concept in a different way. But also, just like everything else, it's not written by us. And to find ourselves in those definitions, I think is really important. And it speaks to, like you said, us finding that connection to how we can thrive and be successful in various spaces, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's among family and friends, but also in the corporate world as well. Like we've got to find ourselves in that. But appreciate you providing a little bit of context around those terms and those concepts, because I really challenge everyone else who's on this call to think about, what do you consider self-advocacy to be, and what does that look like for you? What does sisterhood look like for you? That is something for me personally that changes as you get older. Your relationships change, your friendships change. So, having these evolving personal definitions for terms, I think is really key. And again, I love your definition. I may steal a little bit of that, Ivanna, so thank you so much. So I'm going to throw it over to Erica now. When I was reading your work, I saw the word true self come up, and I was like, ooh, tell me more. So can you talk to us a little bit about true self? What do you define true self as? What does that look like? And then lastly, I'm gonna add a little tidbit on there. How can each of us work to achieve or to recognize our own true self?
I guess when I think of true self, I'm thinking like, who would I be without the expectations and the limitations of other people that they have placed on me? Like, I think when I was like growing and healing, like in the thick of it, I found out, I had to reveal to myself that I was always wearing a mask, and I was sometimes like always performing. And I was doing these things just so I could be in community with other people and receive love from other people, because that's what I had been taught. And so even though I was surrounded by all these other people, I often felt lonely because I wasn't seen and known and loved for who I was. I was seen and known and loved for what I was performing. And so I couldn't be at peace when I was in these groups of people. And I often found that I couldn't even take off that mask when I was alone. So like, who really was I being? Because I didn't know. And so part of that process was learning to give myself permission to be myself when I was just with myself, and let go of those things that were judging me, and like that inner critic in my head, like whoever that voice was at the time, whether it reminded me of a parent or of a friend, like, this isn't who you are, this isn't what you should be doing, and stop judging myself when I was just allowing myself to just be. And recognizing like that is hard, to just even get to that point where you can in some ways silence that inner critic. And so sometimes just not even silencing it, but learning how to change the way in which we speak to ourselves as we get to this process of like finding out who we are. And once we get there and we feel more comfortable, allowing ourselves to stand in that truth. And I think like giving myself permission to get to know myself and build that deeper relationship with self is something that's a process. And you mentioned earlier that in Alex Elle in her book, she was like, healing is like a process, right? And I think committing to getting to know ourselves is a process, and it's one that's lifelong. And not finding ourselves attached to certain things. Like sometimes I found myself saying, this is just who I am. And then I had to ask myself, is this just who I am, or is this who I settled for being? And is the person that I've settled for being even serving me and gonna help me get where I wanna go? And so not being attached to certain things that you think are yourself, and being willing to let go so you can grasp like who you want to be and just a better version of yourself, while still loving the old version of you, like not hating who you were to be who you were, just to embrace where you're going and who you're going to be, was a big part of that process too. And so for me, I've just recognized that committing to getting to know myself throughout life is how I stand up and love myself the most, because that's what gives me the opportunity to really stand in truth and be who I am and be at peace when I am being my most true self.
Thank you so much. That was so powerful. I think that we go through different phases and changes, especially right now. Our bodies may look different, our jobs may look different. Our friend groups may look different, especially, during this pandemic time. And I know that a lot of people have struggled kind of mourning those aspects, but I think some of your words really spoke to, there's ways to honor that, but there's also ways to move forward positively and in healthy ways. Like I think of something very small. My son is 19 months old, and I thought postpartum was, the 2 to 3 months afterwards. Well, no, I'm learning that he's almost 2 years old and my body is still changing. And I recently went to my hairdresser and my hair is thinning, and I've always had really, really thick hair. And I was like, okay, so when is it going to go back? And she was like, no, it may not. And I think your words, like just hearing that, it made me feel better about, there's ways to honor who I was, things I had, things that defined me in the past, but also ways to find beauty and find solace in who I am now and who I want to be in the future. So thank you so much. I felt that. Okay, so we're gonna go through, one or two more prompts for everyone, then we're gonna kick off some Q&A. I'm going to take it back over to Jenn. Focusing on your belief tenets. I saw that was very big with your work. How do your personal belief tenets apply to Black girls? And then how can Black girls develop their own belief tenets?
Yeah, I'm really big on beliefs and values, personal and in your organizations. So, for me, I've actually this year been going through a process of revising my personal beliefs, right? And a lot of it comes from what the other women on the panel have already talked about, this idea that as you're healing and learning to take off the mask, you start realizing like, wait, I don't actually like that thing. I actually like this thing over here. Or I don't actually like that person, right? Like I like this person over here, or this group of people over here. And I will be 40 at the end of this year. So like that is a big milestone as a woman. And I have also separated from my marriage that I started as a teenager. So like there is a different part of my life that is happening right now. And so I wanted to go back into and like evaluate whether the stuff I used to believe was true anymore. And a lot of that changed. And so for me, it's been like not pressing myself to like write it all down at once, but to really just pay more attention to how I'm living my life and the places that make me feel good and the places that make me feel like myself. And then like figuring out what that means for myself in terms of like, how can I boil this down into something that when I'm feeling doubtful, I can come back to. And so for me, this year has been really focused on joy and ease and pleasure and like the things that make me feel like the most myself. And so my principles that I've developed for myself are about bringing me back to that place. So like if something feels good, say yes. Use your no's because they make room for your yeses, right? Like things like if I have the choice, choose pleasure over efficiency. Like, the days I wake up and I really want the big breakfast, but I decide to make the oatmeal because it's quicker, when I really could just take the time and make the big breakfast that will make me feel good, right? So like reminding myself that I'm the first choice. And so like as I make those principles, what are the principles that will always bring me back to me? And so I think like just taking some time to think about yourself, the way you like to move through the world, the things that feel good to you or don't feel good to you, talking with your friends and family who care about you, about what they see for you, and reflecting on that for yourself. And then coming up with some things that like you can just say to yourself that will bring you back to that original, person. It's kind of what I believe and how I use those tenets for myself.
Thank you. That was beautiful. It takes some time as you mature to realize that you change. And sometimes it comes out of the blue. You don't even know it's happening. But to really harness that and to be intentional about that and exploring, I think is so important. So I appreciate you kind of sharing a little bit about your journey and kind of how you're harnessing all of that, how you are picking self, how you are prioritizing self, because as Black women and girls, that's not what we're taught. It's simply just not what we're taught to prioritize ourselves. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. I'm going to kick it over to Ivanna. Ivanna, you're in Boston, right?
Yes, I am.
So my question's around that. I love Boston. My family, my dad's family is all from Boston. And if people have ever been to Boston, they may know, if you have not or don't know too much about Boston is not always a space that is comfortable or is created for people of color, and specifically women of color. So I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about how do you navigate in general, but also, in specific spaces, how do you navigate and live in your full magic in these spaces that don't necessarily accept us or are not created for us?
Thank you for asking. That is definitely very true. Boston has a history of really not being a welcoming space for Black and brown women. I think when I think about this, I think about the fact that if Black girls are not well, we as a society are not well. And so it's really our collective responsibility to love and affirm our girls in order for us all to be well as a society. And so I think a lot about my personal experience growing up in the greater Boston area, and really what helped me live in my full magic and show up in spaces authentically. It's been the power of community and mentorship. And I think when I think about all that I've been able to achieve in terms of like my personal growth, I've only really been able to do that because I have seen other Black women and girls embody those values and really just like teach me how to navigate those spaces. And so I think as Black women and girls, it's our collective responsibility to make sure, as Black people, is our collective responsibility to really just love and affirm our girls and model for them what it looks like to live in your full magic. And I think that's a challenge for so many of us. I know that for a really long time, actually, prior to becoming a teacher, I would straighten my hair a lot. I'm Dominican, so there's a lot of like internalized oppression there. And it wasn't until I actually walked into my classroom that I started to see the importance of modeling self-love for our young people. And so I like cut off all my hair, started to grow it and wear it as myself, because I think it's important to model what it looks like to develop your own agency, what it looks like to take up space in spaces that are not meant for us in the classroom, and really just teaching young people to show up as their authentic selves and embracing that, but also teaching them that even when it is uncomfortable, it's important that you do that. Even when folks don't agree, like, so what? You're standing for what you believe in. And I think that goes back to what Jenn was talking about, just being really clear on your beliefs and your values is so important. And that's actually something that I encourage not just Black and brown people to do, but all people, especially educators. Like, if you are an educator serving Black and brown girls, it is so important that you do these things in your classroom and take the time to understand that like our young girls are humans that deserve to be loved and affirmed. And then how do you as a white educator or an educator in general create a space where girls can be themselves authentically? And so I think really it's through the power of mentorship and community that our girls will be able to show up in the world authentically, even when it's uncomfortable. And so I think also it's just like teaching your girls to shake the table and be okay with that. Like sometimes that's what it takes for you to create change, like meaningful change. And so even when others are, frowning upon you and like making you feel like you made a wrong choice, so what? Because that's really how change starts.
Thank you so much. So many gems there. One, mentorship. I think that I'm not sure if you guys have experienced similar aspects, but I think maybe the generation before us, it wasn't as easy for them to be mentors to us, that there was more kind of competition, that, you had to come right. You had to have the correct mannerisms. Like you said, you had to have your hair in a certain way. Like you had to you had to act in such a way that was accepted for them to feel comfortable mentoring. And I think that that's one of the lovely things about Black Girl Magic, where I think that it's so infectious. But also this shift to, it is fine to wear your hair however you want to wear it. It's fine. Like, your mannerisms are perfectly fine. Like, there's no shade here. We're diverse. We are diverse people. We are diverse as Black girls. I think mentorship has been one of the pivotal things in my career and in my growth. So I really encourage everyone to kind of take Ivanna's words and emphasize how important, if you don't have a mentor right now, go find one. Like, reach out. I know it can be difficult to reach out to someone and say, hey, would you be open to mentorship? But you're seeing women right here that are open and available to pour into others. So take advantage of opportunities like that. And then the last thing that I really took from what you said was that it's so important for educators to have an idea of their beliefs. I think that too often they just kind of get swept up in the system, in the rat race of, just keeping it all together as a teacher, that they're not intentional about the ways that they're interacting with children of color, but also specifically girls of color. Like, I recently saw, one of those like good news portions of a news segment, and it was a white teacher and a little Black girl in her class. I think it was first grade. They were reading some book, and they were using an app, and all of the hairstyles, none of them were girl colored hairstyles. There were no hairstyles that were going to work for us. And the teacher helped her facilitate reaching out to the app to have them add hairstyles that were more inclusive. And those are ways that I think teachers and educators can be really intentional, even if they don't look like us, about supporting the mental health and well-being of their students and of girls of color. So thank you so much. I think we have a few more questions. I have Erica. Erica, can you talk to us about self-affirmations? Self-affirmations, I know, are so important, but why are they important, and how can we develop our own self-affirmations?
I think they're just mainly important because, the way that we talk to ourselves, and we spend so much time like in our head, like talking to ourselves, we don't even realize it, like that those words matter. Like growing up, I used to say like, oh, I'm so dumb, right? And it was something that I would do out of habit until one day a friend was just like, why do you always say that? And I didn't realize like how much power like me talking to myself in that way like had over me. And so I think it's important to affirm ourselves and just tell ourselves the things that we want to hear. Like oftentimes if we're going to hear positive things, we're hoping that people say that about us, right? Out of fear of looking like we're not humble or looking arrogant, right? There's like a difference between, or like even seeming like too full of ourselves. But the question is, if we're not hyping ourselves up and we're not telling those words to us, like who's going to do it? And if we're constantly waiting for other people to validate us in that way, like then how we feel about ourselves is constantly related to how the people around us feel about us. And like, that's just not sustainable. And we're giving too much of our power away when we're relying on all of that affirmation to come from other people. And so I think like in terms of the way we speak to ourselves, like how do we continuously tell ourselves the things that we want to hear, whether it be like us putting up certain signs in our homes or certain images that validate us. I know for me, I'm like, if I'm going to have artwork in my house, it is going to be of Black women. That's one of the ways in which I affirm myself, even if it's not through words. I know that in the morning, like I journal and I write things down of all my thoughts, and like the thoughts that are positive, I amplify those. And the ones that are not, I question like why those are the thoughts in my head and how I can work through those and maybe have a way to change those instead of it being so negative. Because I think from a behavioral aspect, like right now, there's this whole thing about with us on the internet, how do we hold other people accountable? And like sometimes those accountability methods could be very mean and shameful. And people are trying to use shame or being mean to ourselves as a way to motivate us, but sometimes that only keeps us like deeper in shame. It makes us only want to change ourselves using unhealthy methods, because we are just steeped in just not liking ourselves so much that we are trying to find immediate solutions to growth and change, which we know is oftentimes not what it is. Like, it's about having that dedicated process. And so how do we move out of shameful language and mean language and into more loving language? And how do we create those spaces for ourselves, whether it be through words, journaling, or even images, to show that this love and this growth process and this healing process can be one with the loving base and not something that's like harsh.
Yeah, self-talk is so important. Similar to what you shared, I found that I was constantly kind of putting myself down. We talk about imposter syndrome, and I think, imposter syndrome really has to do with the way that we talk to ourselves, the way we talk about ourselves. And as you mentioned, I think as women of color, it's so easy for us to feel like we can't hype ourselves. We have to be humble. We can't throw a party when we do something well. But who said that? Does that still serve us to not celebrate ourselves and to celebrate others? And I think that goes to living in your full magic, is talking to yourself in such a way that you're living in your full magic. So thank you so much. I really encourage everyone, come up with some self-affirmations, find some ways that you can boost yourself, you can empower yourself. We focus so much on empowering others, but in what ways can we also empower ourselves? Okay, so I'm gonna shift over to Danielle. So you talk about channeling ancestors as a part of your journey. Can you talk to us about what this means and how can others channel their ancestors?
Yes. I think to answer this question, I want to go back a little bit and just share a little bit of a personal story. So a few years back, my uncle passed away, and I was devastated. Nothing too, I guess, abnormal there, right? When a person transitions, that's typically, devastating and heartbreaking. But what was interesting about that is that I actually didn't know my uncle very well. I had known him my entire life, but he was very mysterious. And when he would come around, it was like he made you feel like you were the only person in the room. And so he would ask questions to me, and ask me questions about like my yoga practice and, different things that I'm doing and etc. And so that's just how he was, family will like, everybody kind of has the same story. Like, yeah, when he came around, he was just so interested in me that like, we actually didn't take the time to like get to know him. And like I said, he was incredibly mysterious. And so we, as his family, we actually didn't know any of his friends, and his friends didn't know any of his family. He kind of kept his worlds like really separate. And I left home when I was 17 and I was gone for 12 years. And so I would, see him kind of intermittently during that time. And then literally just a few months after returning home, he transitioned, he passed away. And I remember the time that I was visiting before I actually, came back to California, which is where I'm from. I remember just looking at him just in such awe, right? Like, so now at this point, like I'm an adult, so I see the world through like a different lens. I felt like I was really starting to see him. And I just remember thinking like, this man is a sage. Like he is just incredible, And then, I was just visiting, so I was home for a short while, and then I kind of, went back, and I came home a few months later, he transitioned, and it was heartbreaking because, so just kind of a quick pause in the story, you know, as someone who is like committed to living in my magic, right? Which is a process. Sometimes I like nail it, and sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna do better tomorrow because didn't do so great today, right? But as someone who is like deeply committed to that, I've often been like the different one in the family, the weird one, the one, like, you know, family has all kinds of like comments and thoughts and ideas about like who I am, because I have been learning to speak my truth and say when things are not okay, to shake the table, as Ivanna was talking about, or just, you know, just be who I am, right? And so I felt alone a lot of the times, which probably is why I was gone for 12 years, right? And so in deciding to come back and then him transitioning, what that created was an opportunity for us as a family to finally meet his friends, because we didn't know anything. We didn't know anything about it. And what I learned is that he was a yogi and he meditated, and he, like, we were the same. And so then I was like struck with this deep sadness, because I felt like I missed an opportunity to get to know him. I missed an opportunity to have a connection with a family member who was like me, right? Because I felt like I was the only one. And so I was like, oh my goodness, like I had a teacher in my presence and I didn't even know it. Like I didn't even get to take full advantage of like this kind of shared commonality that we had. And so the grief was big and heavy and deep. And I remember one of my mentors telling me, you know, you must not understand like the ancestral world. Like there is definitely room for grief, right? Like the honoring of a person transitioning into another dimension, but he's an ancestor now. And so what that means is you have more access to him than you ever would have had in this life. And he is always there, and he can still be your teacher, and you can still be in community with him. And so that is like really what sent me on this path for, you know, really like learning, like, what does it mean to connect with the ancestors? It was really this desire to connect with him specifically. But what I learned, right, is like, oh my goodness, I have so many ancestors, literally millions. When you start to just do the math and trace back the genealogy, right, there's like millions of people who I don't even know their names, many of them, right, who come and are like able to commune with me in the spiritual world. And I know that like that language, right, like can, depending on like what, I was raised Christian, so depending on like what background, what kind of family, you know, Black folk, we're not always open to this kind of language. But really just what I'm talking about is having a relationship with our ancestors in the same way that we have a relationship with our friends, that we have a relationship with our parents or whoever, right, our family. It is having a relationship with people who have transitioned. And so because they're not physically here in the flesh, that relationship has to look a little bit different. But really at the heart of it, that's what it is. And just like I can choose my friends, I can choose which ancestors I'm in relationship with. Because we may have some ancestors who have caused harm, right? That's a reality. And so maybe we don't want to be in relationship with those ancestors, like, you know, because also, right, there's like the idea that's like, oh yeah, like I'm just with my ancestors. Like, well, not all of them. Right? And so we get to choose, even though, like I said, even the ones whose names we don't know. And so what that can tangibly look like is a number of different ways. I think the theme or the thing that many of us have always kind of come back to when we've been speaking today is really taking the time to get to know ourselves, get to love ourselves. And a big part of that is knowing like where we come from. And so having conversations with our family members and understanding like what are the generational strongholds and what are the generational blessings that like we inherit as being a part of this bloodline. And then we have ancestors who are not even directly related to us, who we also, right, if they've like transitioned, we also are able to have relationship. And they're here. They're always there. Like we don't have to do anything special to like make them be there. It's just like a friend, right? If you want to have a deeper relationship with the friend, you have to water that relationship. You have to nurture that relationship. You call that friend. You spend time with that friend, right? You might send your friend a gift. It is it is truly the same thing. And so by saying their names, by me like telling that story of my uncle, that's one way for me that I'm honoring his life, and I'm honoring the relationship that I have with him by talking about him continually, right? By spending time with him at an altar. And so an altar, again, like doesn't have to be a thing that's like spooky or weird, or, you know, this thing that's like kind of evil or something. It's really just creating a space that, okay, this is our private space where we're gonna come and we're gonna meet. And so a simple way you can think of it as just like having the 4 elements. So earth, air, water, and fire. So for earth, maybe having a plant, maybe having some fresh flowers that you bring. For air, it can be having like a smudge stick or a feather or just your breath, right? Like anything that evokes the air element. It doesn't have to be super complicated. For water, libation, right? So having a vessel and like pouring water into it. And as you pour water, you can, again, call the names of the ancestors who you want to be in relationship with. And for the ones who you don't know, right, you can literally say, I'm pouring libation for my honorable ancestors whose names I don't know. I'm pouring libation for my great-great-great-grandfather. I don't know his name, right? But also with Ancestry.com and all these, you know, African ancestry and all these things, you can also get to learn these things too, right? And so taking the time to like go on a journey to learn, especially as like African Americans in the United States, we were cut off from so much of our history. And so it's real concerted effort that we have to take to go back and learn that, but it's possible. And then for fire, you know, just having a candle, right? And so for those of us who maybe live in households who like, even just those simple things would be like, oh, what you doing? You know, you can just have like a simple, like small little discreet box, you know, in your space with a little candle, like I said, a feather, and you pour your water. And when you're done sharing time with your ancestors, you can pour your water out. Like it really can be that simple. So an altar is one way that you can do that. Taking baths, and just like, so prayer is like when you are in communication with the divine or with spirit or with the ancestors or with God, right? Like whatever name kind of resonates for you, right? And meditation is when you're listening. And so you can do those things that they cost nothing but time, right? You can do those things if you're taking a bath, you know, you can just like, my uncle, for example, was a painter, right? And so one of the things that I did once he transitioned, I wanted to connect with him. I went and took a painting class. I didn't really know anything about painting, but I signed up at like one of the local community colleges, right? It cost me like $50, I think, to enroll, and took a painting class. And so every time I put that brush to the canvas, right, no matter what was being created, that was my way of like connecting with my uncle. And so when we think about like ancestral connection, I think we've just got to like bring it down. We've just got to simplify it, and think of it as like, how can I be in relationship with people who are not physically in their body, with beings who are not physically here?
Thank you. That's so beautiful. I've actually been working on my own ancestral altar, and I have like my grandmothers who have passed away, their obituaries on mine. But like you said, it can be that simple. Like it's not this super convoluted thing. And then one last thing that I thought of as you were talking, not sure if others like watch Lovecraft Country. I actually didn't finish it because I'm such a scaredy cat. But there was one episode where they're focusing on ghosts or spirits. And I had this epiphany because we think of ghosts as such scary, or spirits as such a scary thing. And that episode so beautifully showed that like our ancestors are also like they can be spirits. They, you know, that there's positive in the spirit and the afterlife, and it doesn't have to be this big spooky scary thing. That these are also things that we can call on that still have power, that can still create power in our lives and can help create security and comfort. And I was like, whew, I felt that. I've always I grew up like watching Casper and, you know, Goosebumps and things like that. And it's just always felt so scary and, you know, so out of this world. And then it finally dawned on me. I was like, oh, the same way I think about that, this is also how I can think about my ancestors, and I can think about the beauty in that spirituality as well. So thank you so much for sharing that, Danielle. So I know we are, this conversation was just so beautiful. I apologize, guys, that we didn't have an immense amount of time for Q&A. I do want to just quickly go to each of our panelists. I will say what I'm going to offer, and I think all the panelists have agreed, that I'm going to collect questions. So I'm going to put my email address in the chat. If you have a question for one of the specific panelists, please put their name. If it's more general, I will include it for all, and we will upload something and make sure it gets to everybody so that you can see the answers to your questions. We want to be respectful of the time of the next sessions. So again, I'm going to put my email address in the chat. If you have questions for the panelists, please email me directly. This gets right to me, and I will follow up with them to make sure that we get our questions answered. And then what's something you guys can close out with? Like, what is on your heart or your mind, or what does living in your full magic mean? Like anything that you guys can think of, like that last gem that you want to share with everyone.
The last gem I'll share is to just continuously push yourself to lean into discomfort in order to show up authentically.
I think I'll say my last gem is to just dream bigger. Even if you think it's big, dream a little bit bigger than that.
I'll just say, just place your hand on your heart, close your eyes, just take a breath in and out. And something that simple can be a reminder that you are worthy. If you are still here, if you are breathing air, that you matter, you are worthy, and that you have a place in this world.
I would say give yourself permission to be like your truest and most authentic self and show up in the world and dare people to accept it. But then also dare yourself to be at peace even if no one else does.
Thank you guys so much. There were so many amazing gems. I'm like writing notes over here. This was so beautiful. Thank you guys so much for being here. As I mentioned, I put my personal email address in the chat. Please send any questions and I will follow up directly with all of the panelists. I also put links in the chat. Oh, I sent it just to the panelists. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm going to send it to the attendees. We'll try that again. I'm going to send my personal email address for you guys to follow up with any questions, but I'm also going to put a direct link to the other sessions that are starting now. We have an amazing chat focusing on sexual health, and then we also have a vision board, so visualizing for clarity for 2021. Even though it's May, we can still set some goals, we can still visualize, we can still create clarity in our lives. So again, thank you so much to you guys. This was absolutely amazing. This was such a beautiful conversation, and I hope you guys have a great, amazing rest of your Saturday. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.